2013, China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative aims to construct ill-conceived infrastructure projects across Eurasia, expanding Chinese influence beyond their borders. The European Union joining the BRI would be devastating for two reasons. Our first contention is causing a trade war. The US has long described China and its BRI as its greatest long-term strategic threat. Chapsky 19 explains that the US would perceive the EU, their biggest ally, joining the BRI as a shift to China, and Barkin 19 explains this would lead to an overreaction from Washington. Rob 19 contextualizes that the Trump administration has taken economic sanctions to a whole new level, cementing its foreign policy goals with tariffs that target not only our adversaries, but our allies as well. Thus, Foreign Policy 19 explains that the EU joining the BRI will provoke a trigger-happy Trump into imposing automobile tariffs on EU exports. This would be catastrophic, as U-Wing 19 explains that Germany is most sensitive to an auto industry downturn because vehicles are their biggest export. Auto tariffs would decimate demand for vehicles, decreasing German jobs and productivity before triggering a severe recession. The New York Times 19 explains that since Germany has the Eurozone's biggest economy, accounting for more than a quarter of the bloc's output, they prop up the whole EU. If Germany is pressured, it would bring down the entire Eurozone. The impact is a global recession. The EU Commission 19 explains that the EU is the largest global trader and is deeply integrated into global markets. Thus, an EU recession would reverberate globally, which Blanchard 13 concludes would push 900 million people into poverty. Our second contention is a climate catastrophe. The BRI is a Trojan horse for China to export its excess dirty fossil fuels abroad. Wang 18 explains that China is facing a severe coal overcapacity of 1.8 billion tons, which hinders its economic performance, as Ren 19 explains that overproduction has caused nearly 50% of China's coal plants to face net financial loss in the past year. Thus, Tease 18 explains that Chinese coal companies are being encouraged to move abroad through the BRI, with plans to build 1,600 coal projects in BRI nations. As other investors have pulled out of dirty investments in the developing world in recent years, Lawrence 19 explains that China has become a lender of last resort, funding carbon-heavy projects in BRI host nations that would otherwise go unfunded. Tease warns this could foster dependence on fossil fuels among developing countries, as coal plants typically last up to 50 years. Luckily, China's funding for dirty coal projects is currently running dry. Zoe reports just 2 days ago that China's construction for the BRI has fallen by 50% because of lack of funding. Pay 19 confirms that rising pension costs, waning foreign reserves, slowing economic growth, and the trade war ensure that it will collapse completely. A BRI shutdown would not only halt all future plans, but also stop immediate coal plant construction, as House 17 finds that 62% of Chinese projects have not yet been built. However, if the EU joins the BRI, it revives funding in two ways. First is through direct funding. Curtin finds that the EU is the only actor able to provide the trillions needed to sustain the BRI. Second is by increasing investor confidence. Zhao explains that in order to succeed, BRI projects must be backed by stable institutions. EU cooperation will legitimize the BRI and incentivize other actors to help fund. Reviving these dying coal projects would be a death sentence for our planet. The Yale School of Environmental Studies warns that BRI coal would shatter global emissions targets, increasing emissions by 40%, which will raise temperatures to 2.7 degrees Celsius by 2050. The DELS concludes that the consequences of warming will accelerate in a linear fashion as temperatures rise. Thomas furthers that each 0.1 degree of warming causes more death and suffering, and the NAP quantifies that every degree increase in climate change will decrease crop yields by up to 15%, jeoparding the lives of 2.5 billion who rely on agriculture for their livelihoods. Ultimately, warming will hit developing nations the hardest. The IMF finds that drastic temperature increases would erase around 10% of the GDP of low-emitting countries, thus mitigate. Yeah.
First is the 1,600 coal plants.
Is everyone good? Alex and I affirm the European Union should join the Belt and Road Initiative. Our sole contention is global development, and our first subpoint concerns Europe. After a decade of stagnation, CON19 notes that Europe's largest economies are on the brink of a recession. The root cause behind this slowdown is infrastructure. As Bernard 18 finds, Europe's poor infrastructure investments are dragging the whole economy down. The BRI is key to solving this problem. Montgomery 18 finds that costs of EU-China bilateral trade are significantly higher than the world's average. Fortunately, the BRI's improved rail infrastructure will cut trade times from 45 days to just 21. This also affects maritime trade. As Joshi 19 writes, the BRI includes port infrastructure that connects the EU to China. Indeed, Low 19 finds, after joining the BRI, Italy opened up 2 of its ports to Chinese investments. Empirically, Chinese investments boost trade, as in Greece, the port of Piraeus grew exponentially, becoming the 7th largest in Europe. Overall, Herrera 17 indicates that this would boost trade for Europe by over 6%. Kiriyama 14 contextualizes every 1% increase in trade leads to nearly 0.5% increase in economic growth. Elmer 19 concludes that Beijing's initiative could pull Europe out of its current stagnation and avoid a recession. An EU recession will ripple across the globe, as Lockman 19 finds, due to the EU's economic linkages. An EU decline could spark a global recession, which the IMF quantifies would push 900 million people into poverty. Our second subpoint is about Central Asia. Russell 19 writes that Central Asia has long been poorly connected to the rest of the world, and average trade costs in the region are twice those expected. As a result, the region faces severe underdevelopment. Indeed, the World Bank 14 finds in Central Asia, 80 million people live in poverty. China's current BRI efforts are not fully addressing the problem. Busset 19 finds while China seeks to develop hard infrastructure such as bridges and roads, Beijing is ignoring the region's soft infrastructure needs. Bridges and roads may work to connect economies, but strong financial systems and efficient customs procedures help countries best utilize that infrastructure. Unfortunately, Ruta 18 finds that on average, delays crossing borders, customs procedures, and restrictions tend to be more significant in these countries compared to other regions. Chrisman 19 writes, the EU is the only actor with the desire to fully develop Central Asia through social and economic reform. However, current European efforts are hampered by China. Chrisman furthers, because China is focused on domestic growth and maintains a policy of non-interference, they use their significant influence to restrict EU action in the region. Critically, the World Bank 19 finds the BRI will only improve conditions for participating countries if soft infrastructure reforms are adopted. Fortunately, EU membership in the BRI will uplift Central Asia in 2 ways. First, by reforming the project. Ghazi 17 writes that the BRI is open-ended and relatively flexible, allowing member states to proactively calibrate the initiative. So 17 finds, by engaging with the BRI, the EU can align Chinese infrastructure standards with EU standards of human development through joint projects, information sharing, and enhanced political cooperation. This would reorient the project to better address the soft infrastructure needs of Central Asia, which is why Zoe concludes it will be easier for the EU to influence the BRI from the inside. The second way is through greater regional access. Simply being a part of the Belt and Road grants the EU more leeway into the region to promote reforms. Crossman continues that EU policies right now in Central Asia tend to focus on benefiting Central Asia and Europe only. China therefore curtails these policies to preserve its own power. The BRI is the EU's ticket into the region. As Seneca 18 finds, China will allow the EU to influence the region if it's convinced that it does not clash with its own interests. As part of the BRI, any EU success would also become China's success, which allows Europe to create a better regulatory environment in the region. The results of regional connection and integration in Central Asia would be massive. The European Commission 19 states the EU's development priorities to integrate regions by creating free trade areas and common markets. Then 16 writes, regional integration could improve the use of natural resources and double GDP over the next 10 years. Overall, the UN in 2012 finds that Central Asian integration would lift tens of millions of people out of poverty. For these reasons, we affirm.
Okay. Can I see a couple pieces of evidence?
Yes, sure.
Okay. First, can I see the positive evidence from your second subpoint on Central Asia? Okay. And secondly, can I see can I see 2 more? So first, can I see that BRI projects would have to adhere to EU standards?
Which one do you want first?
I'll just go in order. So like I'll say first, and then EU standards. And then third is that EU policies tend to benefit only the EU and Central Asia.
Right. Here's the
Okay.
All right.
Time starts today. Okay. All right.
Okay.
1 second. Yeah.
All right. What's the second one?
That BRI projects would have to adhere to EU regulatory third was that EU policies only benefit Central Asia as well as the EU.
What was the call? Policies
Yeah.
only benefits.
Yeah. That was on your second one, regional access. Time starts. Okay, yeah, that's fine. That was 30 seconds total.
Alright. Is everybody ready? Okay, so start off on your subpoint B, right? So when the EU joins the BRI, is there any actual solid legislation or law that goes into place that says that China must reform the BRI?
Probably not. Like, I don't think China has a law that's like, if the EU joins, we have to implement these things. But our evidence says that through joint projects, enhance political cooperation because now they're working together, and through information sharing because now they can work with China. They're cooperating together on these projects. They're able to integrate human regulatory practices into hard infrastructure.
Okay,
Can I
so
ask a question?
can I just quickly follow
Sure.
that? So a couple of things. So on your card, right, it just says that cooperation could happen, but it doesn't say by how much it increases specifically by joining the BRI, right? Because I would say that China and the EU already cooperated on a few things, but this doesn't but you still don't see that the BRI standards are changing, right?
Right. I mean, the EU hasn't joined the Belt and Road yet. It's our entire argument, right? That when the EU joins the Belt and Road, these reforms happen. All right.
Okay,
next
well,
question.
yeah, sure.
All right. So, on the second subpoint about coal, on your second warrant about the stable investors, what do investors care about when they're making an investment?
Profitability.
Right.
And coal is the most profitable
No,
investment.
that's not my question. So if they care about profitability, how does the EU joining the project change the profitability of the project?
Right, because these projects, they're not very profitable right now because they just don't have enough investment in the status quo. So no matter so a couple of things. We tell you that it needs EU funding to fill in the investment gap, and also since China is a risky actor for these investors to invest in right now, when the EU joins, it shows that these projects are actually going to be profitable.
How does that
It's basically
affect-
greenlighting investment and showing that they're worth the financial risks for investors to go in and invest in these
Can I
projects.
get a follow up on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does the EU just joining the project? Let's say the EU doesn't put any money towards the project. How does them just signing up onto the project change investors' views?
Because it shows that it's profitable. The EU,
How
one of
does
the
it-
world's
how does
largest
it- if the
economies,
EU doesn't do anything,
decides
right?
that a project is worth its time, then other small investors are also going to follow on. Can I have a question?
Sure.
Okay, so you also say that so you say on your second contention, second subpoint that it will improve regional access.
Yeah.
But what incentive does? But you're saying that other actors who join in can recalibrate this project, right? But if this is true, if Central Asian nations that have already joined in can also do this, then why haven't they already recalibrated the BRI to be more in their favor?
Yeah, so the problem lies within the Central Asian governments. They don't have good regulatory procedures. And the Krusman evidence indicates that the EU is the only one willing to push through these social reforms through soft infrastructure.
But it doesn't say whether China will actually be receptive to the EU's pushing. And I would say
Yeah,
that
so the
EU
Krusman evidence doesn't say that, but our second warrant
Okay.
and our two warrants do say that.
But the thing is, the EU can already do all this pushing right now.
It
But
can't.
however, why not?
The Krusman evidence says because of EU projects aren't in China's best interest, China is blocking the reform.
Wait.
But through our two warrants, number one, through the first one, if EU goes through the BRI, obviously China's going to be okay because the BRI is their own project. But the second one is, even if they're just part of the BRI, there are aligned interests, and China can take credit for the success of the EU, which is why they're going to be more allowing them to do so.
So it's going to begin with a weighing overview that you can fill at the top of their case, and it's going to go down with their case. Yeah, it's going to be low. Actually, I'm going to run a little bit of prep to start now. Okay, that's 10 seconds. So we're ready. Start with an overview. If we win our first contention on tariffs, the round is over. This is for two reasons. The first is because we short-circuit all their arguments. When the world is in a recession, funding for literally everything is cut. Things like infrastructure, things like investment for the developing world, things like infrastructure for Central Asia. Odin tells you that the EU cuts investment first during a recession because it's comparatively more risky to invest in places outside of the EU borders when the EU economy isn't doing well. But secondly, the EIB explains that private investors are unwilling to take on risky investments simply because the market is a lot less stable when the EU economy isn't doing well. But second, we still outweigh on severity because the EU Commission in 19 finds that the EU is the largest supplier of foreign aid in the entire world. The reason that this outweighs their entire case is because even if you increase trade and economic growth, that's fine. But we're telling you that foreign aid goes to things like food, water, and shelter, which means the absence of foreign aid is comparatively worse than anything that they can tell you in their case. But third, we still outweigh on time frame because when a recession happens immediately because of tariffs, it also prevents long-term economic growth because Irons 09 explains that intergenerational poverty leads to less opportunity and poor economic outcomes for kids. Basically, as in, if your parents are poor, you're less likely to have a good education and less likely to move up the social ladder, which is why it costs 4% of GDP per year. But secondly, if we win our impact about climate change, we also win the entire round. This is because climate change inherently destroys a lot of infrastructure. So if we make climate change worse, then all of their trade gains are lost. But then, let's start on their first subpoint about Europe. First, they tell you that we're on a brink of recession. This is not true, because Tran in 2019 explains that while there may be a slight dip in GDP growth, that's not the actual measure we should be using to measure recession. Instead, he finds that A, the unemployment rate is extremely low in Europe in the status quo, and secondly, there's still high capital flows, which means even if there's a slight GDP decrease, there's still enough money flowing around for the economy to recover in the status quo. But secondly, they give you this Barnard evidence, explains that Europe has poor infrastructure. This actually functions as a de-link on their case, because the evidence specifically says that the EU governments do not want to fund their own domestic infrastructure, which means there's no reason why they would take on more debt from China or spend money for BRI infrastructure. But then, they tell you this Amagini evidence, which indicates that rail infrastructure would decrease trade times from 45 to 21 days. The problem with their evidence is that this has already been done before, because Panacea 2018 explains that China literally built a railroad from Chongqing in China to Duisburg in Germany, which literally cut trade times by more than 50%. The problem comes from Lang 2019, who explains that the usage on this railroad has been so low that China has to pay rail companies to ship empty cars through the railroad. Sometimes it's literally only 2% utilized. This makes their argument illogical. The reason for this is that if China really wanted to increase trade, we should be seeing trade utilization in the status quo. However, it's really not being used right now. But really importantly, on their 6% increase in trade for their impact, we say they have to win both of their links about rail and ports to actually win this impact. If they don't win their rail link, we have no idea how much trade increases, which means we have no idea whether they'll be able to prevent a recession in the first place. But then, let's go to their second subpoint about Central Asia. There are a couple of problems here. First, they give you this busted evidence, which indicates that Central Asia needs soft infrastructure needs. The really important thing is that their evidence literally says that China does not want to build this, and neither does the EU. They miss the actor incentive, because if the EU really wanted to actually have economic gains, they should be trying to make free trade agreements with Central Asia and the status quo. But on their two warrants, first, they tell you that there's going to be reform. The really important thing is that we also call their evidence. It says absolutely nothing about how BRI projects are going to be forced to follow EU regulatory standards.
And even if they prove that the reform happens, it doesn't matter, because ANG 2019 literally explains because the BRI is so flexible, the provincial level officials who conduct the projects can literally do whatever they want, and often they take the most profitable route, which is not conducive to poverty reduction. But even then, on their second link about regional access, their evidence says nothing about the EU, only benefiting the EU and China. If anything, the incentive is already there for both countries to work together in the status quo. But secondly, on the impact level, this doesn't really make any sense either, because A, Central Asia can make trade deals with both China and Europe, and secondly, we say there should be investment in Central Asia in the status quo if there was an untapped market right now. But we don't, which is why we won't see any, even if you vote for them.
Clarify, what was your response to Bosnia?
Bozzy?
The first response on sub 1B.
The first response to sub 1B.
Oh, that was just, regional access?
Yeah, no, before we got to
The first
Wait, that
response
China
on our
doesn't
second
want
sub.
to invest in soft infrastructure.
You said China doesn't want to invest in soft infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna answer that.
Oh, can we see the evidence of the provincial governments or whatever?
Oh, yeah, of course.
What's the right question?
This is the hang evidence.
And the first paragraph's about provincial leaders, the second one is about the ambiguity of the PRI.
So we use 1A.
Okay, so the order is going to be frontlining, responding to their weighing, and also doing some weighing, and then just straight down. Okay, frontlining just sub 1B.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
They give you a couple of responses to sub 1B. The first response is that China doesn't want to expand soft infrastructure, but our evidence says specifically the EU does, and China's currently curtailing the EU's efforts into doing so. Once the EU joins the BRI, they're more receptive in allowing the EU to expand their soft infrastructure there. The next response is that there's nothing about being forced to adopt reforms. We're not saying that's going to be forced. When they're working together, China is more likely to allow EU to exert their influence in the BRI, which means that ultimately we still gain access to a reform lane. Their next response is that provincial governments don't want China to be get involved in the first place. But it's not going to be just China here. It's going to be the EU and China, and these provincial governments are going to be lot more receptive for two countries, especially the EU, a highly developed and respected institution, into increasing soft infrastructure in the region. Their next response is that Central Asia is that they should be doing it already, but the point is that they're not. China is ignoring these soft infrastructure needs. The only actor with the incentive, that's the Krusman evidence says, is the only actor with the incentive is the EU specifically, which means that the EU has to join to get the impact. Insofar as this is true, we get full access to Central Asia. Let's respond to their weighing. On their top of their weighing about tariffs, their first thing they tell you is that tariffs short circuits infrastructure investments, but the only way to stimulate the economy during a recession is by increasing infrastructure investments. That's why during the Great Depression, FDR didn't actually stop spending. FDR actually increased infrastructure investments. This is clearly not going to pass with the truth test. But their second response is that there's going to be foreign aid cut, but foreign aid is just a short-term solution to the economy. It's a lot better to have better economic development and more overall better interconnectivity. That's the better way to promote long-term growth, which is why you're always prioritizing our impacts. Their third weighing is that about intergenerational poverty. But if you look to the last Great Recession, a lot of these recession affected people in developed countries who can always bounce back from the recession, but the people who can't bounce back or in a forever recession are the people in Central Asia, which is why they're always prioritized first. At this point, the weighing is pretty clear. Central Asia is the most important impacting round because you can always bounce back from a recession, but you can't bounce back in Central Asia because these people are basically in a forever recession. The only chance you have at promoting growth is by voting for the affirmative team. But furthermore, they say that climate change links into economic damage, but CBC says that this economic damage is going to be inevitable due to the irreversible feedback cycles already kicking in, which means that we're always going to expect this economic damage. It doesn't actually matter when this economic damage comes. They have no way to stop Central Asia from being affected, but the only way you solve Central Asia from being affected is by increasing their economic growth and interconnectivity. Let's go down their case. On tariffs, they say that the EU is going to shift to China and that Trump's going to overreact, but this is not true because many U.S. allies have joined the BRI without a negative reaction, and empirics disprove their claim. But furthermore, what we would also argue is that Trump's not going to lash out negatively. Trump's going to lash out positively. In the past, when other countries joined the BRI, Trump never had a negative reaction. For example, when Italy joined the BRI, Trump didn't lash out. Trump actually gave aid and investment to Italy, and when China created the BRI, the U.S. responded by increasing aid through the Build Act. Well, we would also argue that you should always prefer this for two reasons. First is on actors' incentives. If the U.S. sees that as allies are pivoting away, putting on tariffs would only push them further away, which is counterproductive, which is why the U.S. has the biggest incentive to draw them back. But second of all, it's grounded in empirical evidence. Always prefer our empirics over any empirics that they read because one, they're specific to the BRI, and two, they're specific to the U.S. losing influence. They're probably going to bring up some like EU tariffs in the past, but that's like completely economic issues, and so you can't actually buy them. But the EU joining doesn't actually change that. The fact that the EU has a lot of nuclear powers means that the U.S. has a lot more to lose on the influential stage if the EU joins the BRI, which means that Trump has the biggest incentive to keep them in their sphere of influence. But furthermore, they're not going to enact out of tariffs because one, Trump can't justify the tariffs. Amaro says he has low support from the politicians, but furthermore, it would hurt Trump's election prospect, and Trump has shown that he cares about his election prospect because what Swanson tells you that Trump is easing down on the U.S.-China trade war because of domestic content, and insofar as putting tariffs against the EU will cause the EU to retaliate, harming U.S. workers. Trump does not have incentive to do so, which means that tariffs are going to happen. That's terminal defense. On their second mission about coal, their evidence about 1,600 coal plants being built literally says that Japan and China are competing to build, which means that even if China doesn't build the coal projects, Japan will fill the gap. Coal plants are going to happen regardless. There's nothing you can do to solve it. But furthermore, their collapse narrative is simply frozen in time. What stats tells you that Xi is currently making BRI reforms to address combat criticism overall. First of all, it says that Xi Jinping is increasing transparency to attract investors. This already kicks in their second link. But second of all, it says that China is expanding financing. Even if China is not funding, it doesn't matter because they're looking to other institutions. They're third. But furthermore, what stats also tells you that they're currently restructuring debt and making safer investments, which means that funding is going to be an issue. What this ultimately means is that the BRI is going to exist in both worlds. Coal plants are going to exist in both worlds. There's nothing they can do to solve it. On their specific links about first direct funding, what we say is that funding is not tied to joining. The EU is already funding the project without being a part of it. But second of all, on investor confidence, what we'd argue is that investor confidence is already being solved for because they're looking outside their borders for help.
Okay. Can I just know?
Yeah.
Alright. So first, that Trump can't justify tariffs, which is why he rolled back the U.S.-China trade war.
Yeah.
And secondly,
Oh, it wasn't Trump can't justify it. It's that Trump, people are being hurt by it.
but
Yes.
yeah, I just want to see the context of it.
This
He
one
saw that people were hurt by
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
so he rolled back the trade war. I just want to see the context. And then the second piece of evidence I want to see is that Trump increased investment into Italy because they joined the BRI.
Okay. Yeah. I'll find grants available. I got slots. Do you know how to get past the New York Times deal?
Oh, okay.
I'm on incognito, so.
You don't need it?
No, I'm on incognito, so
Oh,
here, I
okay.
can just like sign in.
Okay. guys want to find it here across it, just like.
Oh wait, this I
Okay. Time starts. Okay. Alright, thanks. What's the second piece? Which is. Oh yeah, increase best material. Actually, we're gonna run a little bit of prep on that. So let's make that.
yeah, this.
I have the cards.
Ready? Yeah. Okay. Ready? Time starts.
You scroll up to the headline, it talks about the BRI.
Okay, yes. Okay. Alright, we're gonna keep running prep starting now. That was a minute total. So you have like 50 seconds.
Okay.
So, does the EU already have trade policies in Central Asia? Does the EU already have trade policies that benefit Central Asia?
Not enough.
Okay,
Another question.
wait. Can I have a really quick follow-up to that? So they already have regulations, but there's still 80 million people in poverty, yes?
We would say that the regulations are not enough. That's not really
So
responsible.
what does enough mean?
Like they're lacking soft infrastructure. Maybe the EU has some involvement in the region, but their like increased involvement is inhibited by China restricting their access to the region. So even if there's some amount of involvement involved, it's not going to be really enough.
Alright.
So now I have a question. So what's more important, coal or tariffs?
I mean,
How does
I
she
think
say?
they're both very important.
So like,
I
what do you
don't
go
know.
for?
I mean, Amanda will show you in summary. Like,
Alright.
we're gonna go for
Okay.
something. Okay, can I ask you a question now?
Yeah.
Okay, so, really importantly, on your first subpoint, you basically say the EU's, or actually you read this evidence that says the EU government does not want to fund infrastructure. Why would the EU government suddenly have an incentive to fund infrastructure in Central Asia that it doesn't want to do it domestically?
That's talking about hard infrastructure. We're talking about soft infrastructure. Hard infrastructure is really expensive, but soft infrastructure is
Wait.
like reforming policies and financial
Okay,
systems. That is
so your entire link is just like more political cooperation between the EU and China.
Not really. It's just like adopting. It's basically expanding soft infrastructure, which is like strong financial systems, custom procedures
Wait,
over law.
I know,
which
right?
means that they're better
But
integrated.
what creates those like soft infrastructure projects?
Yeah, sure. Like EU involvement in the region could be one of those ways. Yeah, basically, if the
So,
EU's
like,
involved in
political
Central Asia,
cooperation.
they can get it. Sure.
Okay,
Okay.
good question.
Yeah. Sure. Let's talk about. Actually, you can have a question if you want.
All right, that sounds good. So, on Central Asia, right? So, the EU and China both have an incentive to increase economic growth in Central Asia, right?
China doesn't only the EU does.
Wait, so why would China suddenly go, okay, I suddenly reverse my opinion about economic productivity in
Oh.
Central Asia?
Yeah, so here's the warranting, right? So if the EU joins the Belt and Road Initiative and cooperates with China, and the EU has successes in Central Asia, that's going to be a success for China as well because they're operating under the same Belt and Road Initiative.
That
So if
doesn't-
it's a win for the Belt and Road, it's a win for China.
That
That's
doesn't
the
really
warranting
make
here.
sense cyclically, right? Because let's think about it, right?
What is
Because the EU can only make better regulations if China lets them, if like
Yeah.
China lets them, right? But you're saying that the only reason that China would let them is if the EU already had successes making regulations.
Wait, I don't really know what you're saying. So,
Wait,
so you're basically saying that like, if the EU is successful, then China will let them in? Or?
Well, no, because you just told me that like the reason why China lets Europe expand their policy is if they had successes in the past.
But right before, you literally tell me the EU policy actions are hampered right
It's
now.
not about successes in the past. I think you're misunderstanding our argument. Our argument is basically that China is restricting EU influence in the region because China wants to be the major power there. China wants to take all the credit. China doesn't want to be involved. But once the EU joins, even if the EU is successful, that's going to be attributed to China's success because they're operating under the BRI, which is China's main goal.
Do you have any evidence that suggests that? Attributed under China's?
Yeah, Senegal.
We're gonna run some crap. Like 8 seconds, so we have 42 seconds left. Wait, actually, where are we going? Okay,
Okay.
that's 4 more seconds.
Is everybody good? Okay, it's gonna start on our case, and then weighing, and then over to theirs. Alright. The easiest way you're gonna be, oh, sorry, my
Wait,
bad.
actually, wait, one second.
Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Is everybody good? Alright. The easiest way you're going to be voting for us is on our first contention about causing a trade war. They give you a few responses in summary. They try to tell you that like the U.S. major allies have already joined and this hasn't caused a trade war yet. We tell you that the EU is specifically different because Chasky says that they're the world's largest economy and also the world's third largest nuclear power. If anything, like their concession that they do have all these nuclear power superchargers are linked because it means that the U.S. will see their largest ally, the EU, joining and supporting China's vision of the world, which just incentivizes them to push back and put tariffs on the EU. This is going to be really bad because we tell you that these German auto tariffs will push the German economy into a collapse and will also lead the entire European economy to fall as well, which it spills over globally and pushes 900 million people into poverty. A few more things, they try to tell you that instead of doing tariffs, Trump will actually increase funding for the Build Act. We tell you that this is just like a prediction and this isn't like an actual policy option. You can call their card. And then they also, like, in response to the Build Act is not specific to China. Nowhere in the legislation for the Build Act does it say it's actually a response to the BRI. If anything, Roberts tells you it's just another U.S. foreign policy tool that they're using not to invest in like Asia, but to like buy 40 Starbucks in Brazil, which is what they've done in the past. And then on to like what they say about how the U.S. always has an incentive to win their allies back. Our Rob card is actually going to tell you that Trump's stance has shifted from imposing tariffs on not only our enemies but our allies as well. That's his #1 foreign policy tool, which is why he's imposed tariffs on allies such as Canada and Mexico in the past, and will impose tariffs on the EU. And then they try to tell you this thing about how Trump was focused on his re-election and won't cause an economic decline in the U.S. However, this is contingent on there being on Trump believing that this will hurt the U.S. economy. However, like in August, Trump has literally said that the tax cuts he's given to the U.S. economy means that his voters are really wealthy and they can weather any like economic decline. And then secondly, he has also said in the past that tariffs don't matter for the U.S. economy because he can always bail out failing industries. So at the point where Trump believes that his economic policies will not hurt the U.S. voters, Trump is always going to go forth and impose these tariffs. And then go over to their side. If we win our case, we also win their entire case because of this way that goes like pretty much conceded. So we tell you, first of all, on the short circuit way, we tell you that in the case of recession, the EU specifically is going to cut investment. They try to give you this example about FDR. However, that's like the US. That's not talking about the EU, which our Odin card is specific to. And this is going to be really important because if the EU can't fund, then there's no infrastructure being funded in Central Asia at all. And furthermore, if China's in a recession because of global spillover, this means that China can't fund infrastructure either. And then secondly, we outweigh on severity as well, because we tell you that the main aid that the EU gives to the rest of the world, the EU is the largest provider of like food, water, and shelter. They try to tell you that like economic growth matters. However, like no, don't let them get away with saying that humanitarian aid doesn't matter, because at the point where people literally die without food and water, this is a far greater like effect on severity than a 0.5% increase in trade. And then thirdly, we outweigh on time frame because they cause intergenerational poverty, which also cripples the development of Central Asia for decades to come, because children growing up in poverty cost 4% of GDP every year. And then more specifically on the Central Asia case, what's really important is that you can see terminal defense. We should look at the after incentive. They tell you in case that China doesn't want to fund soft infrastructure. And also what's really important is what Jonathan tells you in rebuttal. If the EU wanted to fund soft infrastructure, they would have been having signing trade deals with Central Asia already. They're not doing this at the point where neither Europe or Asia wants to fund these deals, then it won't happen.
Oh, actually, can we see the weighing the first part of the evidence about the cutting?
Yeah.
That's all of our Alright. For organization, I'm going to be starting on our second subpoint about Central Asia, the weighing overview, and then their argument about theirs. Is everybody ready? On our argument about Central Asia, they mishandled the responses. The first thing that they say is that China doesn't want to fund soft infrastructure. That is exactly our argument. The Krusman evidence says that China does not want to fund soft infrastructure. The EU is the only actor that has the incentive to do so. The problem comes from also the Krusman evidence, which tells you that since China wants to maintain their influence in the region, they're not letting the EU take action in the region. You can think of it like this: China's like a SoundCloud rapper. All they care about is money and respect. But if they let the EU go in by themselves, they might get some money, but they get no respect because the EU gets to take all the credit. That's why the Seneca evidence says if the EU joins as part of the BRI, China can take credit for the success, which is why they're going to be most likely to allow them for reform. This goes completely conceded by them. At that point, you can cleanly extend the link chain on our case is relatively uncontested. The EUC evidence says that Europe is focused on these soft infrastructure reforms, and the World Bank evidence says that soft infrastructure is the crucial thing to promoting economic reform, which the Lin evidence said could double regional GDP, and the UN finds could lift tens of millions of people out of poverty. We are also winning the round because they mishandled the weighing overview that Alex puts at the top. The first thing that they say is that a world recession prereqs infrastructure development. Number one, their card is power tag. It says investments, not infrastructure. But number two, Alex's response still applies because investment in infrastructure specifically goes up. That's what happened during the Great Depression. This makes a lot of sense because infrastructure creates jobs and more economic growth. It empirically happened. Moreover, we are talking about soft infrastructure. It takes a lot less money to fund soft infrastructure projects, which means we are still winning the linkage here. Then they say that foreign aid goes down. It does not matter because Alex already responds to this. He tells you that foreign aid is a short-term solution. Our solution is a long-term solution because you can provide them with the necessary governmental frameworks to get long-term growth. We are impacting out infinitely to the future. Then they say that there's intergenerational poverty. Well, intergenerational poverty in Central Asian countries is a lot worse. That's why during the 2008 recession we saw developed countries bounce back, but Central Asian countries are still stuck in a forever recession. The only way to solve that is by voting for us. The round is over at this point. But now let's go to their case. They are not willingly linked into tariffs. They say that the EU is different because they have more power and nuclear weapons, but they never implicate this to why Trump would punish them. The overarching response that Alex puts on is that when countries have joined and when the United States has lost influence, Trump does not react with punishment, he reacts with increasing benefits. For example, when Italy joined one of the top economies in the world, a G7 economy, Trump increased aid, they called for the card, and they never really contest that. But moreover, what Alex tells you is that this makes a lot more sense from Trump's incentive. He wants to draw his allies back by giving them benefits. He obviously doesn't want to push them away. But also, they've conceded the evidence weighing that Alex says. He says, we prefer our evidence for two reasons. The first is the empirics are better because it's specific to the BRI. It's about Italy joining the BRI, and it's about the United States losing influence. Their argument about Canada and Mexico are about economic issues. It's completely unrelated to the round. But furthermore, they've completely conceded the Swanson analysis, which indicates that more recently than their evidence, in October, Trump has died down on the trade war, renegotiated the trade war with China because of domestic discontent. He obviously cares about the voters, but moreover, in the past, we've seen that Trump has postponed tariffs to protect U.S. consumers for the holiday shopping season. He does this because he needs to protect his re-election chances. Obviously, he cares about the election. There's no probability on the side. We have won this round, and you should vote for us. Alright, are you all ready for prompts?
Yeah. So is infrastructure investment a form of investment?
So I would say that your evidence is grossly like power tag.
No, it's just talking about investment
right?
overall.
And our
Infrastructure
analysis is
investment
specific
part
to
of
infrastructure, right?
Wait, no,
Like,
you're.
I would say
hold on.
prefer the more
Wait.
specific
Your infrastructure
analysis, right?
like evidence has nothing to do with what happens during your
Okay,
study.
also,
but, like,
you
we're
like
talking
the
about-
evidence you read in case about infrastructure says that the EU is not investing in domestic infrastructure, so it literally like doesn't matter.
Okay, yeah, we've conceded our first
Yeah, I
subject. It's
know,
not
but the thing
important
is, it
round.
applies to because you're saying that the EU will increase infrastructure investments in the case of recession, but at the point where the economy is doing well right now and they're still not funding infrastructure,
Okay, this
they
is
have
new
no
and grand
incentive
cost
to do
first
this
of all.
Even
investment.
if
Wait, no, it's
It is completely new and grand cost, but second
Even
of all,
if that's true, like we're going for soft.
Yeah, I know, but
infrastructure.
right. So you specifically say, and I quote, that China does not want to fund soft infrastructure. So how much does soft infrastructure cost?
Like China doesn't want to pursue it. Maybe I misspoke.
okay, it misspoke. Fund, pursue, like we can get into like the semantics, but the overarching analysis from the Krusman evidence is that China doesn't care about soft infrastructure. The EU is the only one that
I'm
cares
just
about
I'm
these
just
governmental
concerned
reforms.
about like your advocacy, right? So how much does
My
soft
advocacy is not tied to a single
Wait,
word.
how
that I
much
use.
does soft infrastructure cost?
I don't know the exact budget of like the EU. I assume it's less than building things because you don't need raw materials. I think that makes a lot of sense, right?
Generally,
Logically.
cooperation. It's not necessarily
Yeah.
like putting any money into it.
So let's talk about your first contention, right? So you keep repeating the fact that the EU is like a bigger power, right? They have nuclear powers. Why does this change Trump's incentives in this?
All right, there are two reasons why this is true. First, you completely dropped the Rob evidence, which indicates that if the EU were to align
We didn't
itself with
respond to it.
okay,
We
wait,
said ours
no,
was
one second. Which explains that when the EU allies itself with China, Trump no longer sees them as allies but as enemies. But secondly, it doesn't even matter whether the EU is an ally because again, the evidence specifically states that Trump has expanded his tariffs to not only enemies but also allies as well. So
So-
that's why we've seen retaliatory tariffs on Europe, on like soft cheeses, and also Mexico and Canada in the past.
So the EU thing from Rob is definitely not true. Rob just says that Trump has been willing to target allies
I'm
and
sorry, I think
adversaries, right?
that's the Chasky evidence. I'm sorry about that.
Well,
that's
and
something-
second,
Yes,
we
but it
responded to
still
this
shows
already.
that his
These
stance
tariffs on
is being
cheese
wrong.
are over economic issues. Our
Remember-
evidence is specific to the
Okay.
Belt and Road in the United States.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. I just want to get this clear. Like Amanda tells you in summary, the Build Act literally does not have the word
The
Belt
Italy
and Road
evidence that you
Initiative
call
inside
for,
it.
the Italy evidence that you call for, you never respond
Okay,
to. It's
wait.
specific to the United
All right,
States.
Wait,
fine.
the
Let's
thing
talk
is
about
that-
it. Let's
Hold
talk
on.
about the Italy evidence. The Italy evidence actually says nothing about any sort of policy action
It
that
says
Trump has taken.
The
It's
US
just like a
will
prediction
expedite
by one
assistance
journalist.
and aid to the stagnant Italy economy.
So
Even
what
if
does
that's
that
true,
mean?
right? You can't give me a single example in the past when previous U.S. allies joined the BRI and had a negative reaction.
that's
right?
the
Because
point.
the EU is the biggest ally.
Wait, so
They're
it's
the
like a
ones
tipping
that
So
point,
the
right?
overarching
No,
analysis
wait.
is that no matter how
Yeah.
powerful the ally is, Trump likes to
That's
respond
not-
with
That's not true.
positive
That's not
instead
true.
of
The
punishment.
reason is that the difference is that if individual member EU countries join, Trump believes that he can win them back. But the Chasky
This is
evidence
completely
indicates
new
if they
also.
present all a unified bloc, it's different because Trump no
Isn't
longer
it
has
more
that
important
ability.
to win them back because they have nuclear powers and
No,
they matter
wait,
not
this
as
is
much?
exactly what our Rob evidence tells you, that he shifted to a stance. This
No,
isn't like
alright,
post-Avery stuff, because
so-
he shifted to a stance where he's imposing tariffs on not only enemies
Yeah,
but allies.
your
as
Rob
well.
evidence
That's
says
a
that
full
Trump is willing to target allies and adversaries. Not that he will in every scenario. What we say is that
Well,
this
like
scenario is
Chasky tells you-
completely different because it's about the U.S. losing influence over a major power, and when they
Yes.
lose influence over a major power, they have so much more to lose than if they were to
remember,
shut it
the
down.
Chasky evidence explains that he has already lost the nuclear powers when you affirm. It's not like he can get them back. Okay, we have like 40 seconds left. I'm just gonna, one second. start on tariffs, then weighing, and then infrastructure.
Tariffs first.
Yeah. Tariffs first. Okay.
Sorry.
Ready? On tariffs, they give three responses. First, they tell you that when Italy joined, the United States increased investment to Italy. We call their evidence. It literally has nothing to do with an actual policy action from the United States. It's only a prediction by one journalist. You should instead prefer the Chasky evidence, which indicates when the EU joins as an entire bloc, it signals a unified stance, A, against the US, and B, endorsing China's geopolitical strategy. This is why it's uniquely different for every single impact scenario that they try and give. But secondly, they say that Trump will increase funding to the Build Act. Remember, the Amanda tells you in summary, is that literally, if you control F the text of the Build Act, it literally has absolutely nothing to do with the BRI. It's completely unrelated. But this is really important because the Duesterberg evidence indicates that when Trump sees that all these EU allies are pivoting unified against them, he put 25% tariffs against the auto industry. They give a response here. They tell you that Trump wants to draw allies back to themselves. Remember, that A, Rob explained that he doesn't care whether the EU are allies anymore because he's willing to put tariffs on allies and enemies. But second, remember the Chasky evidence which explains that it's a unique geopolitical shift. That's why the Ewing evidence explains that when you put auto tariffs on the EU, it spreads because the German economy is dependent on these automobiles, and most of the demand is going to the US, which means that their tariff, this decreases demand, which decreases economic growth. This is why they never actually contest the link scenario that the entire EU economy is going to collapse because Germany has been supporting it for so long. But then, they tell you that tariffs died down because Trump likes his voter base. Remember, we call their evidence. It's not actually causatory. It just says two paragraphs of the same thing. We should instead prefer the CNBC evidence, which indicates that Trump literally does not care whether a recession occurs because he thinks that the US people have enough money in the status quo. But even if they want to bring up this example about China, delaying tariffs on China, it was literally the 7th anniversary of China. This is why the IMF evidence, which also goes uncontested, indicates that if there are tariffs, the recession spills over and actually hits 900 million people into poverty. Number one, this creates generational poverty, which outweighs their entire case on scope. So we already win right there. But secondly, on the way, the really important thing is that they basically say that infrastructure is going to solve back. But we short-circuit their link, and they never fully address this. Because if there is no funding, there's actually no, A, political will, or B, literally money to go out and do these free trade agreements. Which even if they say that infrastructure is going to solve back for recession in the long term, there's not going to be any infrastructure or soft infrastructure if you affirm. This is really important because even if they tell you it's a long-term impact, the short-term recession ultimately short-circuits this, which is why in order for them to even get an impact on poverty reduction, you have to vote for us first.
So the order is going to be weighing our second subpoint and then defense on their first contention. The round is over when they mishandle the weighing. What we tell you is that it doesn't matter if recessions happen because recessions are inherently cyclic to the global economy, which means that you can always bounce back from recessions. But the people in Central Asia are in a forever recession. No matter what you do in the negative world, there's no way to get them out of poverty. The only chance you have at bringing them out of poverty is through the EU expanding soft infrastructure, which is why our soft infrastructure argument is the most important in the round. They also try to give you this prerequisite analysis, which they said if there's in a recession, there's going to be no money to spend infrastructure. One, what we say this is empirically not true. When FDR hit a recession, he just expanded infrastructure spending. But two, it's soft infrastructure. You don't really need that much money, which means there's inherently the weighing is inherently on our side, which means that if we win our Central Asia point, we win the round. The only defense they extend is that the EU has no will. But we show you specifically through the Krusman evidence, which states that the EU has the desire. The only problem is that China is restricting their action in the region. But if the EU joins the BRI, as per our second word about regional access, they have common ground, which means that China is more likely to let EU expand soft infrastructure in the region, as Lin Chain's completely conceded. At this point, it's a clean assumption for us. These bodies of evidence says that right now China is ignoring the soft infrastructure needs of Central Asia, despite the increase in hard infrastructure, and they lack financial systems and customs procedures. The Krusman evidence says that the EU has the only desire, but they're hammered by China. Crucially, on our second subpoint about regional access, what we say is that when they share common ground, China is more likely to let the EU expand soft infrastructure in the region, which is critical because the UN evidence says that connecting Central Asia is going to lift tens of millions of people out of poverty. And because of this, we're already winning the round. But let's explain why they don't win their case anyways. They mishandle our defense. What we say is that when previous countries have joined the BRI, there's been no punishments whatsoever. Not even a single example they can can give you that specific to the BRI, you should always prefer Italy, even if it's just speculative, because one, what we tell you is that's specific to the BRI, but two, it's specific to the US losing influence in this case. It doesn't matter if Trump's willing to impose tariffs against allies if they don't have the incentive to. The fact that the EU is a nuclear power means that Trump has a lot more to lose. They never really interact with the war team. If they push the EU away, they lose the biggest allies. But on top of that, what we see is the most recent evidence indicates that Trump really cares about his electors. Because of the recent pressures economically, call the card, it's fantastic. It says that Trump is easing down on the economic trade war with China. He cares about the domestic voters, and tariffs will just hurt his voter base, which is why he's never going to do it. The round is over here.